north of the Yueyang province in Hunan. While the small population of this village circulated peacefully through the streets, a man, more specifically, a samurai, or at least that's what he appeared to be thanks to his attire, was sitting in the middle of the pedestrian path, murmuring some rather strange words, or at least that's what women and men passing by him thought. More and more people started paying attention to his words. One of them was, "Just like the wind blows, so does the past," metaphorical and enigmatic, just like this being. The samurai lifted his head, looking directly at the sky, exposing his face to the crowd. On his face, there was a scar that ran from the top of his forehead almost to his neck, bypassing his right eye. His expression was sad but also carefree. "Nothing is left behind," were the last words spoken by this man who will be the protagonist of our story. It all begins with an introduction of the main character, a mysterious individual who has something to tell us through his chronicles. "I caused uproars around the world without fear." Bloodied swords scattered across the entire battlefield indicated the protagonist had been there. "I destroyed everything in the blink of an eye." Ruins and debris were left behind by the samurai whenever he left each combat zone. "I killed all the enemies standing in front of me." From adult soldiers to teenagers and infants, this man was prepared for war and didn't differentiate between genders or ages when they were his enemies. "I mocked the entire world, and that's why they gave me a nickname, Ultimate Divine Demon." The protagonist had been the strongest person in the world, regardless of the country or era he found himself in. But in a moment of carelessness, he was defeated. After triumphing in one of his wars, the protagonist strolled through the central plains nonchalantly, disregarding all the bodies he had left behind, saying it had been too boring. Suddenly, a group of incredibly powerful humans appeared before him, known as the Eight Immortals. Together, they managed to conjure a block of ice that immobilized the as we'll call the Ultimate Divine Demon. After confirming that their magic had been effective, they threw him into the depths of Lake Donjing, where he would remain in a deep and uninterrupted sleep for at least 1,000 years. The Eight Immortals celebrated their achievement of getting rid of Dan Woohyun, the person whose evil seemed to be infinite, as if the term demon was more than just his nickname. After a toast, the Eight Immortals went their separate ways, their mission successfully accomplished. Now, we return to the present where Dan stands up and starts moving among the people. Thoughts in his head tell him that logically, all the people he had known 1,000 years ago wouldn't be alive anymore, as no human could survive such an amount of time. This indicates that he is alone in the world, without a job, a place to live, or a reason to move forward. Dan continued his journey, leaving the city behind and entering a wooded area while being accompanied by his demotivating thoughts. Paying a bit more attention to the path, the samurai comes across a little girl lying unconscious on the ground, facing upwards. Looking at her face, he sees a resemblance to his own when he was a child, but he doesn't allow the ghosts of the past to take over his thoughts and approaches to help the girl. Checking her pulse, he notices she's still alive, but he doubts she'll remain safe for more than 3 or 4 hours. So, he transfers some of his life energy, enough for the girl to survive a bit longer. After that, he realizes she hasn't been well fed, so she wouldn't have the strength to stand up and fend for herself. The protagonist checks his pockets and finds 2 round pills of bright yellow color. He hesitates to give one to the girl since he's unsure of their effect, but he decides to do it anyway, as the worst outcome would be that she gets diarrhea. With utmost delicacy, he places the pill in the girl's mouth and, once he ensures she swallowed it, he composes himself and leaves the place, leaving her to her fate. As he walks away, a few meters distant, the little girl opens her eyelids and weakly opens her eyes. It turns out our protagonist had finished his day lying under a tree in the forest where he had helped the little girl. Now the sun was shining in the sky, waking up the samurai. Upon opening his eyes, the first thing he sees is a little girl in front of him. She looks at him excitedly, with a big smile on her face, and seemingly grateful as well. In her hands, she holds something that turns out to be for Dawn, as she extends her arms offering it to him. Dawn asks the little girl what it is, and she replies that it's a dumpling. The samurai, maintaining the seriousness that characterizes him, tells her that he's not referring to the food but to why she's giving it to him. The girl remains smiling and also silent, apparently not going to answer him, so the protagonist must figure out for himself the reason why the girl is offering it to him. Let's say there's not much science in understanding this. He just saved her life, so the least she can do is to thank him in some way, and this girl had chosen to feed him. Dawn tells the girl that he won't eat her food, and she looks very surprised and even a bit sad about that. Meanwhile, the samurai wonders why no one fears being near him. In other times, it wouldn't have been like that. Dawn decides to stay living in that forest, at least temporarily, as he has nowhere else to go, and the girl is delighted with this decision. In fact, day after day, she returns with her dumplings, generously filled and delicious, for the samurai to eat with her. The protagonist, who refused the first time, starts eating without hesitation from the second time this situation is repeated. And so, a month on the calendar goes by, with the former eating dumplings with the girl whose life he had saved and living in a forest without knowing what to do with his life. One day, Dan decides to return to the village where he had been before meeting the girl, with the intention of investigating where she got so much food from. Next, there's a rather cruel scene in which the girl who had been feeding him with dumplings for over half a month is lying on the ground, face down, receiving a beating from one of the village merchants. The man shouts for everyone to hear that she is a thief and that she had stolen his goods without paying a cent on more than one occasion. According to the merchant's methodology, this action on the part of the girl deserved a beating. Dan observes the situation and, although he understands that stealing is not good, he feels grateful for the food the girl had provided him. He then takes action. He approaches the scene very quickly and unnoticed, and with a simple kick, he breaks the 5 fingers of the merchant who was using a strand of hair to teach the little girl a lesson. After saving the little girl's physical integrity, he retreats even faster than he had arrived at the scene so that no one can recognize him in case he has to return to the northern province. As he walks aimlessly, he comes across a place that takes him back to the past, Lake Dongjing. Dan remembers that he had once been called the Martial King and that, due to a careless mistake, he ended up at the bottom of that lake, which embarrasses him a little. But his thoughts are interrupted by the presence of the girl, who had followed him to the place. She comes out of the nearby bushes, injured. The little girl hugs him and tells him her name is Somi-wa, and she wouldn't want to be alone again. She practically begs him to stay with her. The protagonist thinks that during the 1,000 years he was buried at the bottom of the lake, he was a lonely person, and he doesn't see why he should change his personality now. But thinking a bit more deeply, perhaps it would be convenient to be in Somi's company, as destiny might want it that way. The samurai strongly believes in destiny and understands that if the girl has appeared in his life, it's because her place in the world is by his side. That same night in the forest, they light a campfire together to warm up and combat the cold. Somi falls into a deep sleep, exhausted and stressed from the day, and enters the world of dreams, lying on the protagonist's arm. The samurai has in his mind the words he had said to the girl that morning after saving her from the incident that could have left her lifeless. He had told her to accompany him, to follow him and go with him. But upon analyzing it carefully, Dong hadn't thought about the big detail that he had nowhere to go. Therefore, now he thought about building a home to live together with the girl. Dan remembers that when he was young, he always had the dream of building his own home. Perhaps the time had come to fulfill it, and he had more than enough justifications. The moon hides, and the sun rises high in the sky. Its rays bathe Somi's face, telling her to wake up as a new day had begun. The little girl slowly opens her eyes, not fully awake yet, but something makes her react abruptly. Upon opening her eyes, an imposing building stands before her, something that definitely wasn't there the night before when she fell asleep. Upon closer inspection, she notices the protagonist with a hammer in his hand, as if he were finishing repairing or building something. The girl, impressed and with wide open eyes, approaches the structure to examine it closely. Then she tells the protagonist that the house wasn't there yesterday. Dan denies what she says, trying to convince her that the house was there the previous day, albeit in a ruined state. So, he decided to refurbish it overnight. The girl insists that it seems extremely strange, and once again, she tells him that the house wasn't there yesterday. To which the protagonist of this story, with much less patience, retorts that it was. Now Somi falls silent. She definitely understands that there's no need to argue about it anymore. Although deep down, the little girl doesn't accept the protagonist's response and analyzes in detail how that immense and beautiful house with red clay walls could have appeared there, which, by the way, was a material quite difficult to obtain. The samurai stands up, and with a satisfied look, he says that he's glad the girl liked it. He also mistakenly admits that he had put a lot of effort into its construction, but upon seeing Somi's expression and anticipating that she would start another innocent argument about the origin of the house, he chooses to retract in the moment and explain that he had refurbished it, not built it from scratch. As the girl roams around the surroundings of what will be her new home from this moment on, Dan notices that the house has no fence, and that might be one of the reasons why the little girl had been abandoned. The day goes on as normally as possible, But when the girl wakes up the next day and goes to the patio of her home, she finds a huge and impressive fence extending from the ground to the roof of the entrance. Without the girl asking, Dawn confirms that the fence had been there since the previous day. Somi lets him know that she hadn't asked. She is totally impressed by the new appearance of the home, but despite this, her eyes become a little sad, and she sits on the ground, sighing. Dawn observes her thoughtfully, wondering what could be bothering her when she now has a home with a striking and gigantic fence. Somi asks the protagonist if he doesn't feel the house is a bit empty, and then she mentions the absence of flowers and trees. No need to say more. Another day passes, and when the girl wakes up and goes to the patio of her home, she finds a gigantic tree in the center, surrounded by a small pond that gives it a dignified oriental touch. While the girl washes her hands in the pond, impressed by the clarity of the water, the protagonist thinks that he still has many pieces of furniture to make, such as a sturdy bed. So, he tells himself that this life might be worthy to live. Somi approaches him to say something, but he silences her and starts building a wooden tub of the right size for the girl to fit in. After finishing it, he turns around and tells her that from now on, she'll have to bathe inside that object. He also tells her that he had sold a boar he had hunted earlier and used the money to buy new clothes for her to wear, but she could only put them on after her bath. Somi says she's already clean enough and tries to escape from the protagonist's hands, but sadly for her, she's still too slow and not as elusive as to escape from him. So, she's easily caught and immersed in the tub with warm water and foam. After a long and extended bath, which showed that the girl hadn't taken one in a long time, the protagonist gives her the new clothes to wear. Somi is transformed. Bathed and dressed in a long red kimono, she looks like a young lady from a high-class family. She seems completely happy with what had happened in the past few days. Somi confesses to the samurai that she will be happy and fine as long as she can enjoy his company. Dawn nods, indicating that he agrees with her, and tells her that perhaps together, in solitude, they can live a peaceful life. But what neither of our two protagonists knows is that in the dark of the forest, two individuals observe everything that happens through one of the windows of the home. The next morning, in the city of Hunan, one of the governor's informants enters his room with fresh news for him. He comes in and announces that a mansion has been built in a matter of days near Lake Dongjing. The governor finds this absurd and false, so he ignores the news and asks his informant if he thinks it's appropriate to be drunk so early in the day. Although feeling a bit offended, the informant pleads with his superior that he should see it with his own eyes to understand what he's telling him and believe this story. The governor agrees and informs his informant that he will head to the location that same night to verify what he was told, since he couldn't believe it without seeing it with his own eyes. When the moon was high in the blue sky and there was no sign of the sun, the governor leads a group of his subordinates towards Lake Dongjing. Two of the escorts agree with each other that the governor has been having a few agitated and irritable days lately, but it's because apparently a group of bandits is trying to blend in among the citizens of Hunan. One of them tells the other that it's all because of Zhang Beck, the leader of the bandits, and one of the most feared individuals whom not even assassins dared to approach. Now the governor interrupts the conversation and listens to one of his men say that Zhang Beck is also an expert at escaping, as even the best riders couldn't capture him. Zhang Beck had become a detestable person ever since the day he received the heads of two of his loved ones in bags. This made him resentful towards society, and from that moment on, he hadn't stopped causing headaches for the royalty. The governor says that it had been a restless year, but they shouldn't worry too much because, by order of the palace, this man would be eliminated soon. The conversation of all these characters is interrupted as they come across a mansion, the same one the governor had been informed about in the morning. Some of his escorts don't take it as a good omen, and they kneel down, praying for divine help. On the other hand, others don't look sure about how to proceed, so they wait for the governor's orders. He instructs them to enter the mansion to investigate. After these last words, a blue glow illuminates the governor's back. Dawn appears dramatically, creating a hologram of a tiger scaring the army. With a stern expression, Dawn sarcastically remarks that he wasn't expecting visitors since he hadn't invited anyone that night. After that, he introduces himself as the owner of the house and expects the governor to do the same. The governor introduces himself as Hong and says he's merely a person serving the nation. Dawn introduces himself by his name and, when asked by the governor if he built that mansion, he limits himself to saying that he had refurbished the ruins. Hong points out that, according to the royal orders, it's not permitted to build a home and inhabit it without prior authorization from the authorities. To which the defiant samurai replies that the governor should authorize it right then and there. The governor isn't pleased with Dawn's attitude and orders his men to arrest him immediately. They obey and, tying Dawn's arms, they take him away from his new home towards the city, possibly for torture. Dawn can only think that it's a relief that the little girl is sleeping at the moment and doesn't have to witness those images. But his thought is interrupted by the governor, governor, who tells him that he should worship him to avoid torture and perhaps survive. Suddenly, the march comes to a halt. Something is wrong around the governor's troops. One of his men falls to the ground, defeated and unconscious, and no one understands what happened. Then the rest meet the same fate. They've been ambushed with hundreds of needles piercing their bodies, apparently ending their lives. Now Hong and Dawn are the only ones left standing. From the shadows of the forest, a terrifying war cry is heard, accompanied by a mocking voice directed at the governor, saying that outside of the safe zone, he doesn't seem as strong as he pretends to be. The demented figure of Jang Baek appears before them. Dawn doesn't seem to understand or care about what's happening, but the governor retreats, showing that fear has taken hold of him. The sadistic and terrifying Jang Baek wastes no time and goes straight to the point with the governor, telling him that tonight will be his last night alive. For some reason that we might learn later, he reminds him that it's been 6 months since his family was decapitated. Hong feels completely terrified and sits down on the floor. Behind him, Jang Baek's army begins to corner him, cutting off his escape route. Then he looks at his companion, who is absorbed in looking forward and seems to have no intentions of helping him defend himself. The assassins grab the governor by the neck and threaten to cut off his limbs and then feed them to the dogs. The man begs for his life, but the thugs don't listen and take him away with them. One of the assassins asks his boss what they should do with the protagonist. Jang Baek doesn't seem to have ill intentions towards him, so he decides to set him free by untying him and tells him to consider himself lucky. Then they plan to leave, kidnapping the governor, who is crying and pleading for Dawn to help him. Dawn asks Jang Baek not to leave and asks him what he plans to do with the man he's kidnapping. Then Jang Baek turns around and tells him that he intends to kill him, just like how he killed his family. Dawn's gaze says it all. He wants to save the governor. So, he offers Jang Baek a deal. If he saves him, he won't have the right to ask anything more about the mansion. The companions of the feared criminal start to laugh ironically, believing that the protagonist has no chance of saving him. Even if he manages to do so, he will have to face them. One of them, bald and with a burnt face, lunges at the samurai to silence him once and for all. But in the blink of an eye, the protagonist manages to counter his attack and incapacitates him, knocking him out among the rest of the soldiers. While Jang Baek's assassins are impressed by the fall of one of their 3 most powerful men, their leader analyzes the situation in silence. He hadn't seen any movement from the samurai. Something tells him that he is a person worthy of respect in battle. But that doesn't matter now. It's time to defeat him by taking advantage of their numerical superiority. The protagonist is surrounded by the fearsome Jang Baek and the rest of his assassins. The leader orders them to kill him immediately. So, without further ado, everyone rushes at Dawn. In a matter of seconds, the protagonist analyzes the situation and casually thinks that he could finish all these guys in just 1 minute, as they pose no real challenge to him. However, in the samurai's mind, the smiling face of little Somi appears, and somehow, it takes away his desire to shed blood, something he had done excessively in his past. So, he sighs, closes his eyes, and searches for a simple way to incapacitate all these assassins without taking their lives. Seemingly, he takes too long to make a decision, and the assassins end up surrounding him, creating a curtain of dust around the battlefield that makes it impossible to see what's happening to Jang Baek and Governor Hong. After agonizing seconds, the dust settles, revealing what's happening in the battle. All the assassins sent by Jang Baek lie defeated on the ground, unconscious, except for one who is being held by the neck by the protagonist. Dawn remarks that in the end, he was wrong. It took him much less than a minute to defeat them all. The antagonist is amazed by the samurai's ability to dispose of his men in the blink of an eye. But since he is also a powerful individual, he managed to witness what happened. A sword had been thrown at Dawn by one of his men. Upon noticing it, Dawn quickly picks up a stone from the ground and hurls it with all his might at the blade, incredibly shattering it into dozens of pieces, each of which falls on one of his men, leaving them lying on the ground. Jang Baek admits that what he saw was almost inhuman, and that mysterious individual was starting to worry him a little. Dawn turned out to be the most powerful martial master he had ever seen in his life, and he was definitely on a much higher level than him. Having processed this valuable information for his own well-being, Jang Baek chooses to run away at full speed, getting as far away as possible from the place that represented danger to him. Dawn smiles and internally thinks that he's finally using his legs to run like he had never done before. On the other hand, Governor Hong, who was kneeling by his side, tugs at his attire, getting his attention and begs him not to let Jang Baek escape. The samurai explains that it's not in his nature to chase people once the battle is over, but Hong manages to convince him by saying that to end the matter with his mansion, he needed that criminal alive. All Don wants is for this to be over and for them to leave him in peace in his mansion with little Somi, without anyone getting in their way. So, after contemplating it for a moment, he uses his inhuman speed to chase after the no longer so fearsome Jang Baek. In a matter of seconds, he catches up to him and appears by his side, surprising the enemy who would have never expected the young man to arrive so quickly. Don places his palm on the rival's head and applies force to bury it in the ground, incapacitating him as well. After a while, he returns carrying the body of his enemy and hangs him from a tree. Hong feels grateful, but things don't end here. The governor meets the same fate and is hoisted up on another tree, hanging by his clothes with no possibility of getting down on his own. Don swiftly climbs the branch of that tree and concludes the negotiations with the governor, indicating that from that moment on, he should never approach the mansion again. Hong affirms this and swears that he will abide by it strictly. He also pleads with the protagonist not to tell anyone about what he has experienced. A memory of Somi appears in the samurai's thoughts. In it, the girl tells him that when talking to another person, he should do it with a smile, as if he continues to have that cold attitude, people might be scared of him. So, the protagonist puts on a completely horrifying smile that generates much more fear than his usual stern face. Hong looks away and promises himself never to return to that place, so as not to cross paths with this monster he has just met. The next day, at the market, we see our two protagonists strolling together. The rumors among the people are all the same. The bandits of the forest have been captured. Jang Baek is no longer a threat, among others. The girl listens to them and says she feels much safer now, admitting that she was afraid of being alone in the forest with only her adoptive father as company. As they move on in the market, Somi comes across some fish skewers that look incredibly delicious, and of course, she wants to try one. Don thought he needed nothing more as he had security in his mansion, but he forgot the most important detail to be able to raise the little girl: money, a lot of money. While the child wandered around the area, impressed by each of the shops, money became an increasing concern for the protagonist. He remembered that since he was a child, he used to sleep anywhere safe, without the need for a comfortable bed to rest at night. When he felt hungry, he would simply take one of his weapons and go after wild animals, trying to hunt them down to cook and satisfy himself. There was no need to buy prepared food from someone else. But now, things had changed, and a lot. If he wanted to be responsible for another being's life, he would have to change his way of life, just as he had done the previous nights by building a worthy home for Somi. However, the protagonist had no idea what to do to earn money. So, while analyzing this complex situation, at least complex for him, he calls the girl to leave the place and head back home. As they were on their way back to the mansion, Somi stops by the roadside and asks her friend to wait patiently as she has to do something. Don seems fine with it, but if there's something that characterizes the protagonist, it's curiosity. So, unable to bear it, he asks the girl what she's doing kneeling in the middle of the road. She steps aside to show him that she has just found a beautiful flower that she would like to take home. To do this, she needs to lift it from the ground with a portion of soil to be able to transplant it to her garden without any problems. The protagonist doubts that she can do it alone, but the girl feels self-sufficient and, with more pride than strength, grabs the flower by the stem and starts pulling with all her might. Somi says that the flower is suspiciously heavy and firmly rooted in the ground, but after an even greater effort, she manages to uproot it from the source. Don notices that on the ground, exactly where they are, there are footprints from a person who clearly isn't them, so he assumes that someone might be nearby. As they examine the plant just removed from the ground, they come across a little surprise. Tied to the flower's root, there is a large bag that seems to hide something important and interesting. When the girl decides to explore and find out what's inside the package, a wild scream from somewhere nearby is heard. The voice demands that she stay away from what doesn't belong to her. From goodness knows where, a person with a knife jumps straight at Somi to attack her and protect the package. Don is obviously attentive to this and steps in the way of this madman with a knife, risking his physical integrity to protect the little girl. He delivers a fatal blow to the attacker, leaving him knocked out and lying unconscious on the ground. This leads him to suppose that whatever is inside that bag is truly valuable, so he wants to check it for himself. Before he can take the package to verify its importance and value, he turns to see if Somi is fine. She is indeed fine, but she has fainted due to the small fight that happened just a moment ago. Don carries both unconscious bodies and also takes the bag, heading straight back home. When night falls, the mysterious character who had attempted to attack the girl wakes up in the bed that the protagonist had kindly offered him until he regains consciousness. Don presents himself before him and with a cold look, asks why he dared to attack the girl that afternoon. The young man with brown hair and big eyes takes a moment to answer, feeling lost in the threatening gaze of the homeowner. He feels that just by looking at him, this person has spilled too much blood in his past. The young man with brown hair excuses himself, saying that he doesn't know why he acted the way he did. But this doesn't convince Don, who sits beside him and menacingly asks him how much he thinks his life is worth. The young man tells him that maybe it's worth 1,000,000 coins, and this surprises the protagonist, who thinks he is evaluating his life too highly. So, he makes a counteroffer and tells him that it's only worth 1 coin. After a bit of confusion about how he manages to arrive at the correct result, our protagonist ends up telling the captive man that the value to stay alive now is nothing less than 5,000,000. In the magistrate's house, beautiful ladies surround the governor. They serve him food and drinks with smiles on their faces. All of this is thanks to capturing the most wanted criminal, Jang Baek, which promises safer and more prosperous times for the city. Hong politely requests a break from the women who are surrounding him to step out of his residence for a moment. As he does so, he covers his face with his hat and screams out of frustration with the situation. Deep down, he knows that he wasn't the one who captured the enemy, but the people don't know this, and it's starting to bring consequences to the governor. For instance, citizens call him a hero under false pretenses, and this could have repercussions in the future. Another, and perhaps the most concerning, is a meeting he had with a representative from the local government who informed him that a golden Buddha statue had been stolen. The statue was made of gold and had been taken from one of the Empire's residences, which meant that the thief was a true professional. Now the Empire's man was seeking Governor Hong's help, as he shouldn't have any problems in recovering the statue, considering he had dealt with the most feared criminal in the region. Hong can't refuse, even if he wanted to, and accepts to assist the government in finding the stolen object. However, deep down, he knows it won't be easy. Now, his thoughts are focused on figuring out who the thief might be. In Don's home, the unwelcome guest is doing household chores. He's currently sweeping the floor, and his defeated look is evident. Suddenly, he remembers what had happened the night before. He had a conversation with Don, who had put a price on his life, practically threatening to take it if he didn't pay up. But this brown-haired young man didn't have enough money to pay the 5,000,000 coins demanded, so he desperately offered to do household chores. On one hand, he could wash dishes and clothes, clean rooms, and even cook. The last option tempts Don a lot, even though he really doesn't know how to cook, despite thinking otherwise. Somi usually doesn't finish her meals, not because he cooks poorly, but because she's rarely hungry. In reality, the girl is too kind to tell him what she really thinks of his dishes. The prisoner tries his best to get the homeowner to let him work for his family, as he's afraid of being killed. He had seen Don in action before, defending the girl, and knew he shouldn't mess with him or Somi under any circumstances. Don gives him the okay to start working in the house, allowing him to atone for his sins. The brown-haired man smiles and thanks him for the opportunity, but in reality, he's only promising himself that he'll be attentive to the moment when Don gets distracted so he can escape his slavery. This is despite Don warning him that if he tries to escape, he'll kill him without hesitation. Now, back to the present, he finds himself sweeping the patio of the house. He's spent an entire week of hard work, and the owner of the house hasn't given him any rest, which is starting to annoy the domestic employee. He thinks it's all the fault of the cursed girl who, by some unfortunate chance, decided to unearth the flower in which he had tied a bag with an incredible treasure he had stolen. Now, this thief planned to recover that treasure, a golden Buddha, to take it to the black market and make a great deal of money. But there was something that terrified him, the girl watching him from the fence. At night, the thief has the opportunity to showcase his culinary skills. He serves an incredibly delicious dish that leaves Somi amazed and unsatisfied. The latter tells him that he'll increase his monthly salary now. The young man thanks him with a smile, but deep inside, he can't wait to end this wretched relationship. He only longs to find his stolen Buddha and leave that pathetic house. The next day, the prisoner continues with his household chores, feeling more humiliated than ever. He knows he's the best thief of all, the only one capable of infiltrating the royal palace, and he doesn't deserve to be going through this situation. Suddenly, the protagonist appears in front of him and informs him that he'll go fishing with Somi, so he'll be in charge of taking care of the house while they're away. The thief nods excitedly, knowing this is a clear opportunity to escape. Before leaving, Don reminds him that if he attempts to escape, his debt will double. The thief confesses his name, Jang Samtae, and swears by it that he'll keep the house clean and safe and won't dare to challenge Don for anything in the world. After exchanging greetings, each goes their own way. Moments later, we find our protagonist with the girl at the edge of Dongjing Lake, practicing fishing with their rods, even though they don't need more provisions since they already have plenty. The samurai stands up and, with a stick, draws a circle on the ground around Somi. He tells her that he needs to be away for a few moments as he has something to attend to. The smiling girl, as usual, tells him not to worry and, cleverly noting the circle around her, lets him know that she'll stay inside it, no matter what happens. Dawn praises her intelligence. What he has created is a magic circle of invisibility that can keep humans or animals invisible as long as they stay inside it. Now, Dawn leaves the lake, promising to return soon, and heads to Governor Hong's house. When he arrives, he finds the governor facing a wall, clearly in distress. He has no idea how to recover the Golden Buddha, and it's causing him incredible stress. Being so preoccupied with the situation, he doesn't notice Dawn's presence until he clears his throat to get his attention. Once he's in Hong's focus, he tells him that he has a suggestion for him. Samtae obviously disobeys the orders, so he takes the stolen Golden Buddha and heads to a pawn shop where he asks to sell it for 2 million coins. The shop owner says it's a high amount and quite difficult to pay, and the thief retorts, saying he risked his life for that statue. The fugitive, who has an eye patch like a pirate, takes the bag with the Buddha and, before accepting the offer, informs the thief that Zhang Bek had been recently captured, which had put the imperial forces on high alert for any pirate activity and all bandits in the Hunan area. So, before taking the bag, he pleads with the thief never to mention this transaction. Samtae gives him his word. A moment later, one of the pirate's men, who was keeping watch outside the black market building, opens the doors shouting in alarm that they are surrounded by imperial officers. While the pirate, whose name is Somi Ing Mo, is distracted by the news, Samtae takes the money and escapes through the window. Somi Ing, the trafficker, who got distracted for just a moment, now looks around the room searching for him and suspecting that he might be the one who alerted the imperial forces. But it was already too late. The thief had escaped through the window, mocking him and his carelessness. After that, the officers enter the place and handcuff each one of the men there. Somi Ing tells Hong that he is very strong and won't be easily captured, but the governor ignores that. He's more focused on how on earth Dawn knew where to find this individual and how he himself ended up with the Golden Buddha statue. But he doesn't want to dwell on it too much. He knows that when he returns to the city, he'll be received as a hero by the imperial officials and the royal family since he had recovered the stolen object. This would be even bigger than capturing Zhang Bek. Now we move to the outside of the black market where Samtae has lost the authorities. The pursuit has been going on for a long time, and the thief is starting to get tired, so he decides to approach the cliff and let himself fall, knowing he can avoid getting hurt, so the height doesn't worry him. As he reaches the ledge, he finds the protagonist with his classic wise attitude, arms crossed and a smug smile. He surprises the thief by saying he's very slow. Samtae can't believe that the man he had escaped from in the first place before getting into this chase with the authorities is now standing right in front of him, blocking his escape route. The thief's reaction is to jump off the cliff since, as mentioned before, he has a technique that prevents him from feeling pain when falling from such heights. So, without further ado, he jumps into the void. After this reckless maneuver, as he's about to hit the ground, a surprise awaits him. The protagonist is already there, and he grabs him by the leg to prevent him from hitting the ground. Ironically, he tells him that he should find a less dangerous way to descend the cliff. Samtae is completely astonished by the man's abilities, as if he had teleported. But he's utterly stubborn, and when the protagonist lets him go, he runs away once more to lose him from sight. He tries to do so by taking a boat, which apparently arrives empty at the shore, but as he attempts to board it, Dawn is inside waiting for him. So Samtae retreats again, trying to leave him behind. When the thief tries to escape by blending into the crowd, it turns out the protagonist appears behind him, mounted on a horse. After running as far away as possible, he finds a seemingly deserted cave. He enters it, keeping an eye on the entrance he had come through, making sure his pursuer didn't follow him. But to his surprise, Dawn is already inside the cave. One last time, he attempts to run into the forest, but it's futile because his pursuer is waiting for him right where he would pass. Samtae gives up and falls to his knees, exhausted, asking him how is this even possible. Dawn ignores his question and remembers that, for breaking his word, the thief now owes him twice the money, so the total amounts to 10 million coins, even though he kept the 2 million he stole from the black market. So now, he only owes 8 million. Samtae enters a state of rage and tries to hit the samurai, who, thinking about collecting his reward for capturing Zhang Bek earlier, they are about to face off. It goes without saying that the punch the thief attempted to throw at the protagonist didn't hit its target. Apparently, the thief regretted it, and everything ended up being for nothing. Now it was time to return to household chores. While he cleaned the house for a measly 3 coins, the little girl watched him and admired his work. For instance, the house was sparkling clean, not to mention that the boy cooked incredibly well. In the thief's memories, there were several escape attempts that had always been thwarted by the homeowner, but luckily for him, his debt hadn't increased again. While he checked the ingredients to cook that night, he realized he didn't have everything he needed, and it was time to go shopping in the village. So, without further ado, he went out to do the shopping. On his way through the forest, he thought that going shopping was becoming a nuisance since the protagonist's mansion was far away from the city. But a presence behind him caught his attention. It was the girl who had been following him since they left the house. When the thief turned around to ask the little girl what she wanted, she hid behind a tree, thinking she hadn't been detected. But Samtae appeared in front of her and asked her what she wanted. She grabbed his tunic and told him that she didn't like being alone, so she wanted to accompany him on the shopping trip. The thief wasn't very comfortable with the idea, but he thought it would be best if she went along since letting her go back home alone through the forest might expose her to the danger of wild animals. And if something happened to the girl, his boss would undoubtedly end his life as well. He gives in and carries the little girl on his shoulders, and she promises to remain quiet during the journey. A few seconds after he lifts her, the girl spots berries on a tree and informs Samtae that there's food above their heads. Later, we see them escaping from a wild boar chase that has ambushed them. Finally, we see the girl interacting with the birds flying near them. It was a bit obvious that an infant couldn't remain silent for a few minutes. After all these amusing scenes, Somi falls asleep on the thief's shoulders for a few moments. She wakes up after several minutes upon arriving at the market. She seems excited to be at their destination. Samtae notices that security in the streets has multiplied after the golden statue was stolen from the palace, which was expected. But while observing closely, he gets a bit distracted and fails to notice that a bald man with battle scars on his face had been following him briefly and had now snatched the girl from his shoulders. Samtae relentlessly pursues the captor, knowing very well that if the girl were in danger or something happened to her, his life would be over in a matter of hours. Now he uses a speed-boosting technique to get as close as possible to the man holding the girl. When he finally faces the man, ready to fight him for the girl's custody, the bald man tells him that he fell into a trap. He finds himself surrounded by dozens of people who don't seem friendly at all. One of them lunges at him and delivers a punch that possibly knocked him out. But before we continue with this, we must go back to the mansion in the forest. Dawn is sitting in a chair, noticing that the mansion is very silent. He had gotten used to Somi hopping around, talking to him, or his servant. The protagonist is sure that the girl had followed Samtae on his way to the city while he was out hunting. But he knows very well that the streets are dangerous these days, so he decides to set out to find the girl, fearing that something bad might happen to her. The bandits are beating Samtae like they've never done before, but he remains steadfast and resilient, earning the admiration of his enemies. Beneath him lies Somi, who luckily hasn't received any blows from the villains. Now we see a memory where the girl's protector is just a child. It turns out that his parents had died very early, leaving him in charge of his little sister. To support and sustain their lives, Samtae had no choice but to start stealing from a very young age. His younger sister was very worried about their situation, but he downplayed it, telling her not to worry. One day, he managed to steal from a merchant who had wonderful garments. He brought home a long violet kimono for his little sister, who was delighted with the gift. However, Samtae wisely suggested that she not wear that outfit for the next 2 months, as they needed to wait until those people left the village. It was obvious that you couldn't steal something and wear it the next day in front of its previous owner. His younger sister nodded as if she understood. The next day, Samtae arrives home with the new stolen merchandise for the day and can't find his little sister anywhere. This forces him to go out and search for her in the city. After checking all possible places, he finally finds her in a desolate alley. The girl was lying on the ground with torn clothing and visible bruises. She had lost her life at the hands of someone who apparently found a reason to give her a savage beating. Later, Samtae understands what had happened. The violet kimono he had brought the day before was nowhere to be found in their home, indicating that the girl had disobeyed and worn it to go out. Samtae deduced that his little sister wore that garment and unfortunately ran into its previous owner on the city streets. From that day on, after overcoming the depression that scene had brought him, he began to harbor hatred toward children, as they were disobedient and got into trouble because of it. Now we return to the present, where Samtae, after receiving so many blows, can no longer find a way to defend Somi, and they finally manage to take her from his grasp. One of the bandits informs the beaten man that thanks to the golden Buddha statue he had given to their leader Wang Mo, he was executed. This generated a general unrest among the merchants, and as a result, they now sought revenge. They found no better way to get back at him than by taking the life of the little girl traveling with him. Samtae can't move or do anything to prevent one of these men from taking Somi from his arms. Now the bandits plan how to end her life in the most entertaining way to make the traitorous thief suffer in the worst possible manner. Somi manages to defend herself by biting her captor's arm and then runs back to Samtae. She stands in front of him and opens her arms, just like Piccolo did to protect Gohan in the battle against the Saiyans. She is willing to give her life for her thief friend. Samtae begins to have memories in which the face of his deceased sister appears, and upon seeing Somi, he feels that history is about to repeat itself, so he begs her to please escape from the place immediately. She seems not to hear him and is determined to stay there. When the bandits make the final decision to end both characters' lives, the protagonist appears behind them, surprising everyone present. Before taking action, he surveys the battlefield, and there is one detail that is unforgivable to him, prompting him to end the lives of all the enemies present slowly and painfully. Samtae opens his eyes and finds himself in the room of the remote mansion where he works. Next to him is little Somi, who seems very happy to see him awake. When he regains consciousness, the thief doesn't remember well what happened just moments ago. His last memory was seeing Dawn arrive at the battlefield and asking him to escape as quickly as possible, carrying Somi. What had happened to the protagonist? Then he tells the girl that what she did was very wrong. He advises her that the next time she faces a similar situation to the one from the previous afternoon, she should escape and leave behind anyone she may encounter since her life is more important than others. Somi seems not to like what the thief is teaching her and says that she won't handle things that way. She yells at him that from now on, her goal will be to become stronger to fight the bad guys and that she will always be willing to sacrifice herself for others, as she doesn't want to lose any more family members. After this, she leaves the room, leaving the injured Samtae alone. He feels confused as he had started the conversation to scold the girl but ended up being scolded instead. Now we return to the exterior, more precisely to the place of the violent events that happened a few moments ago. Hong, the magistrate, and his troops are in the area conducting an exploration. They had received an emergency call explaining that there was a fight group near the village causing disorder. As they venture further into the forest, they come across a scene favorable to them, where they won't have to do much work. Don is standing there with dozens of unconscious bodies around him. He had beaten each and every one of them until they were unconscious and near death. When Hong sees him, he explains that all those scumbags are Wong's subordinates, so they can be arrested one by one and taken to the village to be judged for their actions. Once the constables start working, the protagonist approaches the governor, asking him what he knows about the Dark Faction. Hong is a bit concerned about the sensitive topic the protagonist wants to discuss now, as it requires careful handling. The governor explains that the Dark Faction is a group of criminals and vagabonds, the most feared in the Central Plain. They are recruited exclusively to carry out crimes that only they can do due to their level of wickedness and coldness. Don informs the magistrate that all those people they are arresting, who belong to the black market, are associates of the Dark Faction. So, this rumor will likely reach the Central Plain, and chaos may be imminent. Hong's face changes, and he now seems much more worried than before. But the protagonist tries to reassure him, telling him that the Dark Faction owes him, and apparently, they have no interest in settling that debt. So, he will stand by the governor. Now they need to visit Mount Hang, where the secret lair of their next enemies is located. Now we go to Mount Hang, where we meet Yang Hyuxing, one of the leaders of the Dark Faction. He is having a conversation with one of his informants, who tells him that the men from the black market haven't contacted the faction yet. This starts to worry Yang, as he is already facing problems from his superiors, who are becoming impatient due to the lack of contact from the bandits of the black market. They had already had enough trouble days ago with the execution of Zhang Beck. Suddenly, a collapse startles them. A wall falls in front of Yang and the informant, generating smoke and debris in the room. The figure of a man slowly emerges as the dust settles. It's Dawn, the protagonist, who seeks to end things once and for all. Without making any effort, Yang ends up being knocked out and later arrested by Governor Hong's troops. But before handing over the unconscious man to the authorities, Dawn takes the trouble to keep the gold coins that had fallen from the pockets of the Dark Faction member. They would be necessary to feed Somi, and it turns out that the protagonist was not satisfied with just a few gold coins, so he took the small liberty of searching the adjacent rooms of the Dark Faction and took everything he could that had some value to later sell or exchange for necessary items to provide for Somi. Now we fast forward 3 months on the calendar, right into the arrival of summer. But with this season came a problem as well. During the last 3 months, The protagonist had managed to feed his tyrannized man and his adopted daughter with 3 daily meals, but not just any kind of meals. They were elaborate dishes that were much less nutritious for the body. Now the 2 people living with him suffered from overweight. Their stomachs were open and they wanted to eat more and more non-stop. Don knows he must do something soon because, despite being somewhat comical, the health of his friends was at risk. He decides to gather them for a moment to make an announcement. He will start teaching them martial arts so they can start moving. Then he sends the thief to buy books related to the streets. Samtae finds the decision curious as street books are of the 3rd category. Don smiles, saying that it's the category he belongs to. Somi hears this and laughs at the thief as he leaves the place. After a while, Samtae returns with all the encyclopedic tomes he could get on the subject of martial arts. Don starts reading them, looking for the best one to begin the classes until he finds it. Later, he gathers them in the mansion's courtyard to start the practice. The apprentices have read a bit from the books and start showing off some of what they have learned. The protagonist scolds them for performing strange movements, but they respond that's how the books illustrate the moves to be done. Don explains that it's incorrect. Each person can create their martial style with customized movements. What a book says is just the notes of someone who didn't want to forget what they were doing and wrote it down on paper. The practice lasts a long time, and the result is finally seeing Somi perfecting a strike that sounds like a whip, while Samtae lies on the ground with his belly up, completely exhausted and unable to move. Don, with his arms crossed, observes the little girl and feels happy to see her improving, not so much in martial arts but because he knows that if she continues to work hard like this, she will lose weight and become the girl she was before. Dinner time approaches, and the protagonist had been waiting for something that finally happened. The table was overflowing with food, and the other 2 diners swallowed desperately, as if it were their last meal. This disappoints the samurai, who thinks it will be harder than he thought. Time passed, let's assume several months, and finally, all the training bore fruit. Somi and Samtae had returned to their usual healthy forms. Don had achieved it. In the main building of the Dark Faction, Sima Chan makes his presentation in front of us. He is an adult man with blonde hair and a green headband. Evil can be seen on his face. Within this organization, everyone usually calls him the Wolf King. This individual has gathered many of the subjects belonging to the Dark Faction in his hall. He then asks them for explanations as to why 2 of the people who contributed the most gold to this sect, Wan Mo and Zhang Bek, have been captured. One of the present individuals tries to give an explanation, but for some reason, the Wolf King interrupts his words by throwing a blunt object at his head, sending him straight to the other world with that fatal blow. The leader explains to all his subordinates that he could not accept that everyone who went in search of Samtae has not returned to make contact. Hunan has always been a peaceful place for them to conduct their business since there was no force capable of opposing them. But something had changed. In his thoughts, he had 2 people in mind, one of them being Magistrate Hong, and on the other hand, he was curious about the thief Samtae. Sima Chan had ordered his men to kidnap these 2 individuals and interrogate them to obtain real information about what was happening in the town of Hunan. Meanwhile, at the mansion in the forest, the protagonist is meditating and is awakened by a gust of wind. Samtae is lying on the ground, exhausted from training, and on the other side, Somi is also meditating. But upon hearing the other 2 individuals talking about breakfast, she immediately wakes up, ready to go eat. Later, Don is once again analyzing the wind. Something is not right, so he asks, or rather forces, Samtae to go to Yueyang and inform him of what is happening. His servant heads to his destination, and Captain Chugok is in her quarters eating with her bodyguards. One of them informs her that tomorrow is the day when the magistrate will transfer Zhang Bek and his subordinates to the imperial family, probably for their execution. Chugok says that they won't make things easy for the empire. The Dark Faction has never done so. Although she admits that she finds it very intriguing that they have had him in custody for the last 3 months, surely he has been interrogated numerous times to extract all possible information from him. So now she wonders about the chances of saving him during the transfer. The answers from her informants don't convince her, so she orders them to kill all the individuals who will be transferred. It's easier to eliminate the prisoners than to try to save them. This way, they will also eliminate any evidence that could escape from their mouths. After giving the corresponding orders, Chugok's men leave her alone in the dining room of her home. She tells herself that she remembers the faces of those involved in the matter, such as Magistrate Hong and that strange guy named Samtae. Something at the door of her home, which was left open, surprises her. A man is standing with his back to her, stretching his back muscles. She recognizes him from somewhere. She thinks for a second until his face comes to her mind. It was Samtae, and he was just meters away. It was time to capture him. When she decides to follow him, the man starts to blend into the crowd walking on the streets. She weaves through the crowd, confident that she could find him. But after following him for a while, she reaches a dead-end alley. She had lost Samtae. The latter returned home, or rather, to the home of his boss, Don, and told him that a mysterious person followed him for a while until he lost them in an alley. Don believed him, but he needed more information about the dark faction to plan both an attack and a defense. So Samtae begins to explain that 50 years ago, that faction was created thanks to an unknown person. It is also said that the dark faction holds grudges against 10 other factions, and finally, the strongest and most suggestive rumor was that this group of professional assassins had been founded by someone who was once part of the demonic cult. Samtae continues to tell a little about the history of this clan. At first, no one took them seriously. They appeared to be just another faction like the rest. But thanks to their demonic leader, an intelligent and powerful man, they suddenly gained importance in society. Everyone began to respect the dark faction because of their leader's capabilities. So, no one sought to destabilize them. Even though 10 factions were against them, they did not dare to confront them. Legend has it that the 8 great families joined forces and pressured the Millennium Alliance, forcing the dark faction to hide and disappear from human sight for a long time. The protagonist explains that the Millennium Alliance is a council created by the factions to support each other and fight against the dark faction. However, as the dark faction had cleverly hidden itself thanks to its creator, Millennium became a peaceful area where there was no need to battle. Don also mentions that when he was younger, Millennium crushed a young alliance of vagabonds just to show off their strength, but now that Millennium no longer exists, it has become completely peaceful. After a brief moment of silence, Samtae asks the protagonist what will happen to the magistrate, who is likely in danger as the black faction, particularly Chugok's men, is looking for him. Don admits to having forgotten about Hong due to the stories about the dark faction. Now we return to Chugok's quarters, where she has captured Hong. Her men have been quick and efficient enough to achieve their goal. The magistrate is bleeding, sitting on the floor, wondering what these individuals will do to him. Chugok introduces herself, although she says there is no need for introductions, as they are well known for their fame among society. Chugok tells him that they have brought him there for the simple purpose of asking him a few questions. Hong regrets letting his guard down during Jang Baek's transfer, as it led to his capture. But that is in the past now, and he must think about the present, so he agrees to answer Chugok's questions. She tells him that although he captured Jang Baek and defeated Wan in the black market, it doesn't make sense for Hong to have gone after the black faction since there were no previous grudges. Chugok's idea was to make the governor reveal who the true culprit behind all this is. Hong pauses, and in his mind appears the image of Don, the samurai who saved his life and also helped him on 2 other occasions. Chugok notices that the man has remembered something and asks about that memory. Hong closes his eyes and tells himself that he is a man and must respect his word, so he would prefer death over betraying Don. Chugok smiles ironically, understanding that the magistrate will not tell her anything she wants to know. Therefore, she decides to start torturing him, convinced that this way he will talk, as he is a weak person. The commander takes out a small pouch containing a mysterious substance, the truth powder. Then she blows it towards his face for the governor to inhale, hoping he will start talking. This situation is being observed by Samtae, who, after witnessing the scene, rushes back at full speed to tell everything to Don, just like a boy who is repeatedly sent to do errands. But as Don makes him understand, Hong is completely necessary for them, and Don himself cannot go to rescue him. He needs the element of surprise. He must remain unknown to the dark faction and cannot reveal himself to them. So Samtae heads back to where the magistrate is being held captive to save him. Upon arriving, he contemplates the most effective strategy to infiltrate the room and rescue the magistrate. Thus, he decides to use the only attack he knows well, the surprise attack. Samtae delivers a powerful kick to one of Chugok's bodyguards and then lifts Hong, making a run for it. Chugok, with a look of embarrassment at falling for such a simple attack, orders her subordinates to catch them. The pursuit begins, and after running a long distance, Don appears on top of a rock, under the moonlight, unsheathing his katana and ready to take out the enemies who are chasing his spy. Samtae climbs up a tree branch alongside the unconscious body of Hang. The latter wakes up after a while, and the spy covers his mouth with his hand so that he doesn't speak or ask obvious questions, risking being overheard. Hong understands the situation and remains silent until the guards move away. Once they are sure they can speak, Samtae introduces himself, saying that he is a subordinate of Don. Hong smiles and says he knows Mr. Don and excitedly confesses that he wouldn't be alive if it weren't for him, and that Don had also helped him on several occasions, blah 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 blah. Samtae gets bored with the conversation. If only Hong knew that everything good Don does is in exchange for a better life for himself and the girl, Somi. Now that they know each other, they plan their safe escape together. This is quite complex as Chugok's men are undoubtedly determined to pursue them to the death. To Samtae and Hong's surprise, when they look down, 6 guards are watching them with a victorious air, eager to get them off the tree branch and take them to Chugok. So they have no choice but to jump to the ground and start running again in the opposite direction of the dark faction's forces. After another pursuit of several minutes, the duo finds themselves cornered by their pursuers against bushes and rocks. Behind them appears Chugok, visibly angry with them for their evasive actions and lack of cooperation. Although Samtae has little experience in combat other than his famous surprise attacks, he gets ready to face anyone who dares to take a step forward. But through the power of the script, coincidence, or maybe because it was all planned, Don makes his appearance in front of this group of people, knocking out each and every one of the enemies who wanted to punish Samtae for escaping along with the dark faction's prisoner. The last soldier standing before being defeated, just like his comrades, manages to ask the protagonist who the hell he was. To which he responds that he was none other than the martial god. These last words leave Commander Chugok wide-eyed, not ready for what she has just heard. In her memory, she still recalls Sanfeng, the immortal who founded the Wudang sect. Also, Dharma, who established the systems within the Shaolin Temple. She even remembers the celestial demon, the only one capable of ruling the demonic cult, but even he hadn't reached the rank that Dawn had, the rank of martial god. Chugok doesn't have the courage to face the martial god, so she remains silent, signaling the start of a conversation. Dawn asks if they are the demonic faction, and upon receiving a positive answer, he tells them they are trash and always will be. Chugok should be upset, but the reality is that she feels a mixture of fear and respect for the figure of the man standing before her. Dawn threatens the commander, saying that if she has something to say or manifest against him, now is the exact moment to do it. Chugok doesn't have much to say, neither in favor nor against the martial god. But that doesn't matter now. The protagonist unsheathes his sword again and mercilessly finishes off the remaining army around them. Meanwhile, a few meters away, his servant and the governor watch the fight. Samtae makes an inappropriate comment that goes against his boss, and the magistrate overhears what he said. He immediately lets him know that he doesn't like, under any circumstances, a slave disrespecting his master, so he should apologize to him or at least show more respect from that moment on. Samtae is a proud man and apparently prefers to ignore what Hong is telling him, and a heated argument almost turns into a fistfight. Fortunately, Dawn intervenes, who is completely covered in blood due to the battle he just completed. He asks them to please stop and informs them that it's time to return home. Both stand up, obeying the protagonist, and the three begin to walk towards the mansion in the forest, leaving behind dozens of corpses, including that of leader Chugok, who, like her troops, was unable to put up even the slightest resistance against Dawn's power. The next day, the government suffered a raid by the Empire. Thanks to this, they realized that all the slaves were dead, and those who were not were in critical condition, practically on the verge of death as well. But the most striking thing about all this was that the magistrate was nowhere to be found. He had been kidnapped. The government formed search teams to find the magistrate. The village began to panic, and with the number of recent events that had occurred, it was even easier for them to lose their composure. In a restaurant in the village, rumors spread that the magistrate had been kidnapped by the dark faction, but it was too late to search for him. Most likely, he had been killed, and his body discarded in some remote place difficult to find. The mere thought that Hong could be dead saddened the people of the village, as they all held him dear for his recent achievements that had brought peace to the town. Meanwhile, in the protagonist's house, the girl is on Dawn's lap, asking for help very nervously because an unknown man is watching her. That man is Hong, whom she hadn't had a chance to meet yet. The magistrate is eating something and smiling at Somi, who remains embarrassed in the protagonist's arms. Hong believes that Somi is Dawn's daughter. In fact, he finds a resemblance in their facial features. Finally, Somi introduces herself to him as a guest, and the magistrate kindly responds that he has a son around her age, and she can come to play at his house whenever she wants because he can bet that they will become good friends. Now, let's go to see what happens in the central plain, more precisely in Sima's chamber, who receives a subordinate bringing bad news. They have lost contact with their allies again, and worst of all, the magistrate has disappeared. Sima understands that something may have gone wrong, but he remains relaxed since he trusts that Chugok would fulfill her mission regardless. The informant tells him that Chugok should return soon, but they also have no accurate information about her whereabouts, which makes things a bit more complicated. Sima begins to get annoyed by the woman's gloomy news and, to put an end to it, he asks her to summon the most veteran and experienced soldiers they have to search every corner of Hunan. He orders them to find the magistrate and now the martial king king who is causing headaches to the dark faction. Returning to Dan's mansion, he tells Samtae to take care of the home while he heads to Tianzi Mountain in search of the dark faction's hideout, as confirmed by Chugok. He leaves the magistrate with the task of returning to the village with the slaves from the last battle to continue earning points with the royalty. Finally, he instructs them to practice a lot since they are both extremely weak beings, and in a battle against any of the dark faction's troops, they would undoubtedly succumb to even the slightest attack on any part of their bodies. Later, Don leaves his home and sets out on the road to Tianzi Mountain. Along the way, he walks through a forest, thinking that when he was young, he was obsessed with power. But now he is a different man. He has found another meaning in life after meeting Somi. Suddenly, a group of 9 bandits ambush him, and the protagonist finds himself surrounded by enemies. One of them tells him that if he wants to pass through the area, he must hand over everything he's carrying. At first, Don remains silent, analyzing the different possibilities of reaction, and then asks his rivals what would happen if he has nothing to give them. Without saying a word, one bandit orders the rest to strip him to verify what the man is saying. But shortly after they approach him, a female voice warns them to leave him alone, and they all stop to see what will happen. On top of a tree sat a woman dressed in blue, who scolds all the thugs, saying it's not fair that they all together threaten a simple and weak young man. Clearly, this young lady didn't know who she was talking about. The bandits observe her intrigued, not knowing how to react. The girl draws a sword from its sheath and presents it to them, telling them that she is extremely embarrassed by the scene she just witnessed. The girl's name is Soyi, and she is part of one of the Great 8 families. She belongs to the Namgung family, which is part of the Muram alliance, the same one the protagonist mentioned some time ago. Soyi jumps down from where she was and attacks the ruffians, taking advantage of the higher ground. With skilled sword movements, she defeats all those who were threatening Don just moments ago. The samurai doesn't move at all. It's clear that he is not surprised by what he sees, nor does he feel nervous or afraid of the girl. After a few brief seconds, the woman from the Namgung family stands before him, sheaths her weapon, and smiles at him. Soyi boasts about the battle she just won, with a haughty expression on her face. Then she tells the protagonist that thanks to her timely arrival, he should not suffer any pain or anything like that. He should consider himself extremely fortunate. Don remains expressionless and silent, like a wise man who stays quiet. He knows very well that there's no need to boast about his power or prove who he is. However, at least to say something to encourage the young girl, he praises her swordsmanship. This leads Soyi to start boasting about her technique again, but the protagonist is not interested in listening, so he ignores her and turns toward the bodies of the men who fell moments ago. He goes to one of them and searches his pockets for money. He repeats this action with all of them while the intrigued girl, though knowing the answer already, asks him what he is supposed to be doing. Don gathers a handful of silver coins and explains that most likely, this money was stolen from other people, so his task at the moment is to recover it for them. To compensate for Sohai's work, and even though it may seem like a mockery, he gives her only 1 silver coin. But the protagonist is not foolish or stingy, and he wants to know more about her to understand who he is dealing with. So by giving her only 1 coin, the girl complains about her share of the payment and curses the small amount she received. Don observes her with a smile, as this comment reveals that she belongs to a financially well-off family. Soyi believes that she has done much more to deserve only that payment, and even if she is right, the protagonist escapes her sight, leaving her perplexed as she can't understand how he managed to disappear just like that. Now, the samurai stops at a local eatery in the village, where he orders noodles for lunch. Strangely, all the men here turn to watch Don as he eats. Or maybe they are just keeping an eye on whether he eats or not. A few moments later, the protagonist leaves the village restaurant and continues on his way to his destination, but something is not right with him, and he can feel it. There is a slight discomfort in his body accompanied by a cough, and not just any cough. He covers a spit with the palm of his hand and notices that what he has spat out is mixed with blood. Don, without showing concern as he usually does, returns peacefully to the tavern with a message that is not exactly peaceful. Upon re-entering it, he unsheathes his saber and cuts down everyone in his path, leaving them dead. After finishing the bloodbath and getting his revenge for the attempted poisoning, he continues once again through the streets of the village. As he looks around, he recalls the words of Commander Chugok, who had told him that the Dark Faction did not have a specific headquarters but rather the entire village was its base. But his recollection is interrupted by several men on horseback wearing the characteristic dolly hat commonly recognized in China. He had reached the main building of the Black Faction. One of these hatted men manages to escape from the massacre he was witnessing and goes up to Sima's office to report what was happening. Sima listens attentively, but despite giving it attention, he can't believe what his subordinate is telling telling him that only one person could have taken down more than 100 of them has only one explanation, and that was what really started to worry him. Suddenly, the door opens again, and the sound of a drawn sword is heard. Next, the blood of the subordinate had bathed the walls and even Seema's feet. Seema, turning around, is faced with the formidable image of Dawn, perhaps the last thing he would have wanted to see in his life. But it was too late to analyze it. A blow from the protagonist leaves him slumped against the wall and unconscious. During the evening, the magistrate arrives at Tianzi Mountain and begins ordering his forces to arrest each and every one of the individuals in the vicinity. Some of them are surprised by the work the magistrate has done in defeating the dark faction. Dawn hands Seema over to Hong's mercy, stating that he was the leader. He then informs them that he will leave the area to return early with Somi. Before he departs, he reminds Hong that he owes him, and he should prepare the rewards once the commotion has ended. Once he had left, from the top of a building, because apparently this person liked heights, Soyi is watching the arrest and downfall of the dark faction. But something doesn't smell right, and she knows it. It's not possible that the magistrate, with his low fighting power, defeated the entire dark faction without help, and not only that but also discovered their hiding place, something that the Empire or even the biggest 8 families had not managed to do for many years. Soyi was absolutely sure that someone must have helped them, but who? In the Murim alliance, an elder named Chum, who was its leader, talks with Yeagle Woom. The latter was his counselor and had brought news that the dark faction had fallen into the hands of just one martial master. The leader of the alliance sends him along with the Phoenix team to gather information and, if possible, negotiate with him to join them. Soyi is in the village gathering information, or at least trying to, as she is the captain of the Phoenix team. But she has to stop for a moment and sit on the ground, holding her stomach, as she has eaten too many sweets, and a strong pain has taken hold of her organs. She knows well that her grandfather, Chum, did not like this kind of behavior, so she is thankful he is not around at that moment and vows not to eat sweets for a while to avoid feeling this discomfort. Suddenly, Somi appears in front of her, and although Soyi doesn't know the little girl, Somi offers her a sweet as she seems to feel sorry for seeing her on the ground. Soyi doesn't find it hard to break the promise she had just made to herself and devours the candy the girl had given her desperately. When she finishes, she says she would love to thank her father for this. Somi responds that she doesn't have parents, but a tall man's figure appears behind her, taking her by the name, saying he is her father. It's Dawn. Soyi is momentarily impressed by the coincidence of life that has put him in front of her again, and something tells her that she should ask for his help with her search for the martial artist who defeated the dark faction. The protagonist says, "No, thanks," and walks away slowly, and even though the girl tells him that she hasn't proposed anything yet, he repeats the same words, showing that he is not interested in helping her. Somi tells him that he seems like a good person and asks for his help, calling him "Dad" around 8 times to convince him. And this is something that apparently softens the protagonist a bit as he stops walking and observes her thoughtfully. But he decides it's not the right time and continues on his way. During the afternoon, Dawn receives a visit from the magistrate, and with him, a box of 100 gold coins. This surprises the protagonist a bit as he didn't think he could amass that sum so quickly. Hong tells him it's the least he can do for the warrior who had helped him so much lately. While they continue chatting about various things, the governor observes little Somi playing in the garden of the house through the window. Hong gives Dawn an idea. How would he feel about sending Somi to school? And that's how the first part of this manhwa ends. If you have reached this part of the video, let me tell you that you have been one of the few people to make it here. So comment the word "God" in the comments. Remember to subscribe to not miss any videos. With that said, see you in the next video.